All right, good afternoon. Welcome to this month's Department of the Interior Museum Lunchtime Lecture Series. We're typically the first Wednesday of each month, but thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. We'll be resuming our typical Wednesdays from here on out. I am pleased to be welcoming Tracy Baetz. She's from the Department of the Interior staff. She joined our staff in 2013 as our chief curator. On the heels of last year's exhibition, Posterity, WPA's Art Legacy in America's Public Lands, she has just opened DOI Pop, so we opened recently past spring. Tracy holds a master's degree in American Studies from Florida State University and a bachelor's degrees in history and government from College of William and Mary. She's curated shows on such diverse topics as photography, baseball, rustic furniture, and folk art. Her career has spanned nearly 25 years at local, state, and federal museums, including a decade at the Smithsonian Institution and 7 years as the executive director of the Brickstore Museum in southern Maine. She was a member of the exhibition team which brought the unprecedented Smithsonian show Smithsonian's America to Japan in 1994 and served as a curator and outreach coordinator for the Smithsonian's 150th anniversary. And that was a traveling exhibit through the Smithsonian. She later was the founding program manager for the Smithsonian Affiliations, a national initiative which is still in existence, and it's involved partnerships and programming with more than 125 museums nationwide. Please welcome Tracy.
Thanks very much, Diana, and thanks for coming, everyone. We're going to take a little time this afternoon to explore the Department of the Interior and its relationship with pop culture from the late 1800s up to the present day, and if that sounds really daunting, it's going to be pretty fast-paced, so we're not going year by year or even decade by decade. But first, a very quick show of hands. How many people here have already had a chance to go through the exhibition upstairs? Okay, a good number. That's fine. No worries. It's not a prerequisite for being here. If you've already seen it, great, and thanks very much. Tell your friends. There's actually quite a bit in this presentation that didn't make it up in the physical show and up on the walls, so you're in for a bonus and getting some extra content. And if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, obviously I encourage you to do so. But then for the next 45 minutes or so, you're going to be getting a really good overview. Consider it kind of a virtual walkthrough and a whole lot more. I hope you'll come away with a sense of how intertwined pop culture is with DOI history. I hope you'll get just a small inkling of how DOI's people and places have shaped American identity and figured into radio programs, television shows, and best-selling publications. I hope you'll be just as blown away as I was as to how often America's public lands and wildlife refuges and national parks, and even this very headquarters building we're in, have been cast in very memorable supporting roles. I hope you'll see how this pop culture relationship means balancing stewardship with the environment. And I hope you'll never watch a car commercial the same way ever again because you'll be too busy looking and to try to identify the landmarks in the background. And if you work here, if you're a DOI employee, I hope you'll leave here thinking just how hip and cool DOI really is. So let's just kind of jump right in here. U.S. Department of the Interior, DOI, huge federal agency, right? More than 70,000 employees nationwide, 9 bureaus, and many important missions. DOI, as many of you know in the audience because you're employees here, protects America's natural resources and our heritage. We honor our nation's responsibilities to tribal nations. We advocate for America's island communities. We help supply energy to power our future. It's all really weighty, important stuff. So what with water rights and climate change and renewable energy and endangered species, you might have a pretty good sense of how DOI impacts your daily life and the importance of our work here collectively. But you also might be really surprised to learn how firmly ingrained DOI is in our pop culture. And it's not really much of a stretch, really, when you stop to think about it. When European explorers were first stepping onto these shores centuries ago, what was it that was kind of making the biggest impression on them? What were they reporting back on and sending missives back overseas? It was the open space. It was our natural beauty, our virgin forests, an abundance of fish and animals. You fast forward to the 1800s, And the United States is now a young nation, right? We have this whole series of government-sponsored expeditions. Think Lewis and Clark and the 4 big surveys of the West, Wheeler and King and Hayden and Powell. They're all expanding our concept of the frontier, or they're surveying and mapping the West, and really reinforcing and adding to those initial impressions of our landscape. And that's where we get our heroic landscapes and our mountains' majesty. It's from all those reports back. So it's really no wonder that so many of these places were among the first to be preserved as our national monuments and parks. Today, the Department of the Interior is the steward of approximately 20% of the land in the United States. It's a stat that gets bandied about quite a bit, but it's a huge one. And it includes some of the most picturesque and inspirational spots in the country. And so it's little wonder that this same spellbinding and historic scenery shows up time and again on air and on screen and in print. So a few early examples for you. This first picture here on your left is a real signature piece from our collection with the Interior Museum. It's a famous painting that a lot of people don't know belongs to us, but it does. Artist Thomas Moran's 1871 masterpiece. It's a huge painting. It's a lot bigger than what it is on that screen. It's 12 feet by 7 feet. It's an oil-on canvas called Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. It was inspired by his travels accompanying the Hayden expedition and was submitted as visual testimony to Congress to help support a Yellowstone Park bill. And it was obviously showing the beauty and the grandeur of the West. And then the next piece there in the middle, from the archives of Yellowstone National Park, it's this really great pamphlet produced by the Northern Pacific Railroad in 1885, touting the magnificence, again, of the Yellowstone region. I don't know if you can make it out from where you're sitting, but it's entitled Alice's Adventures in the New Wonderland. So it's posited as a letter from Alice, the same child that Lewis Carroll wrote about in Alice in Wonderland. But in this pamphlet, she's all grown up and writing a friend about the, quote, the land of wonders that she's experiencing on her train trip west. And make no mistake, the railroad's trying to get you to ride the train and explore, right? So this brochure, this little pamphlet is full of a hyperbole and remarks on just how big everything is and how new and how lovely and how captivating. And then you see on the right here the 1916 issue. It's a famous issue of National Geographic magazine that is subtitled Land of the Best. And it's set as a quote, it's that little subtitle there, the tribute to the scenic grandeur and unsurpassed natural resources of our own country. And it too was really a siren song in helping to convince Congress, in this case, to establish the National Park Service later that year. So it's full of photos and maps and things to inspire you to support the concept of a National Park Service. Well, in the decades to follow, there's an explosion of examples where the worlds of popular culture and DOI collide. On records, radio programs, books, movies, cartoons, you name it. And so if you visit our exhibition upstairs, you'll see the whole gamut. The oldest piece in our show is this Mammoth Cave romance book on the left there by William Lee Popham. It's from 1911. It's significant for being one of his 7 Wonders of the World series, all by the same author. They're all set in American parks or significant American locales. So there's Mammoth Cave romance, there's Yosemite Valley romance, Yellowstone Park romance, and there's even a Washington Monument romance. So you kind of get the idea. I won't go through all 7, but it's essentially the same plot with different characters in a different setting. But they come complete. They're sort of a little travel romance kind of thing too, because they have photographs and a map and visitor service kind of information in these thin little books. In this one, Miss Violet is the belle of Bowling Green, and she meets young Franklin one fine day while she's visiting Mammoth Cave. And so you kind of get the idea of where these stories go. And of course, he's just smitten, right? So. Juxtapose that from 1911 with this newest and most contemporary piece in the show, and it's this graphic novel comic book called Super Indian, and this is volume 2, it just came out this April, and it's by the super talented Aragon Starr. She's a singer, songwriter, actress, artist. She's Kickapoo. Her main character in this graphic novel is Hubert Logan, the young man that's on the cover there, who lives on the reservation and unwittingly gains his superpowers from eating tainted government cheese. And as his alter ego, Super Indian, there he and his trusty sidekicks, and there's also a talking dog involved, they fight the evils that threaten his reservation. In this second volume in particular, there's a really great DOI connection, because Super Indian in this one is resisting the destructive forces of the vengeful Blood Quantum, who is a Bureau of Indian Affairs vampire who will stop at nothing. So there's, I will not have any more spoilers, and you can go find out what happens. But before we go too far down the path of fictional superheroes, the exhibit sort of pauses, and so we'll pause too and kind of take a look at some real-life DOI individuals from its past. Many of the policymakers and scientists, researchers and historians within DOI are, as you know, respected experts in their field, and you are probably some of them in our audience. But over the centuries, a few of them have really made contributions so great that their work is known far beyond just the halls of Interior. So they have transcended to kind of having a pop culture status of their own. So let's take a look. We highlight 6 in the exhibition. Secretaries of the Interior as kind of a category unto its own. Stephen Mather, George Alexander Grant, Ding Darling, Rachel Carson, and Constantine Costa-Dillon. So first up, Secretaries of the Interior. The 51 men and women who have served as Secretary of the Interior since the department's founding in 1849 may not all be household names. I'm not going to ask you to try to name them all. But this cabinet position, and sometimes the individual, him or herself, do garner considerable public pop culture references, and kind of more than you'd think. I mean, you know, in most movies, the president or maybe the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense or somebody will get some airtime. But, you know, the cabinet member, Secretary of the Interior, 8th in line, succession-wise, maybe not so much, but they do, actually. So our 32nd Secretary, Harold Ickes, was a pretty colorful character, kind of a curmudgeon, our longest-serving secretary, 13 years, the entire presidency of FDR. He oversaw the creation of this very building that we're in, and was the first sitting secretary to appear on the cover of Time magazine, which was the first weekly magazine. That was in 1933. And here's the tidbit that's going to win you your millions on Jeopardy. He was also a character, not himself, but his personage, was a character in the musical Annie. There's a scene where Annie tags along with Daddy Warbucks to a cabinet meeting at the White House. And they're all kind of congregating and bemoaning the Great Depression. And it's supposedly Annie's optimism and just sunny disposition that rouses them out of their gloomy outlook. And ta-da, she's responsible for the New Deal. So, so the scene concludes with Roosevelt actually kind of exhorting all his cabinet members to join in song, and he specifically kind of pokes the character of Harold Ickes directly to get him to sing Tomorrow. So, but it's not just Ickes that gets all the credit and the glory. Our next secretary, the 33rd Secretary, Julius Krug, was portrayed by Daniel Baldwin, so not bad to get, I think Daniel Baldwin was a lot more handsome than Krug was in real life, but he was in the HBO movie Grey Gardens. In 2006, the film Idiocracy, there's a character played by Luke Wilson who gets transported or transplanted into the future, and he's given an IQ test, and they figure out that he's like the most intelligent person alive, and so his reward is he gets to be Secretary of the Interior. So, and then there's this big medallion that he wears and stuff for it too. And anybody see, especially if you have kids or grandkids, last year's Disney flick, the animated show, the Planes, Fire and Rescue? Okay, somebody in the back there. It's like Cars except with planes. It's set in the fictional Piston Peak National Park, and there's a wildfire, and one of the characters that comes zooming to the rescue is this green 1968 Ford Bronco, voiced by Fred Willard, the comedian, and it's the Secretary of the Interior. So we're there. So next up is Stephen Mather. Both an industrialist and a conservationist, he was a mining executive who really shaped the National Park Service as its founding director. His early career, he started out as a reporter, but he joined the Pacific Coast Borax firm in doing advertising and sales. They mined borax from Death Valley, using the mule teams to haul it to the trailhead and then get it out to market to make all these different soaps and detergents and cleaners. And he's actually the one, famously credited with adding the 20 Mule Team tagline to the company's signature product, and that really moved them ahead of their competition and to create that nationally recognized brand, the 20 Mule Team soap. And the company too then went on to become the sponsor for the Death Valley Days radio programs. That was the longest running syndicated radio program and then television program. Ronald Reagan ended up actually being one of the hosts for that. Mather actually left that company to start his own borax mining company and quickly made his millions. Apart from his business pursuits, he was really supportive of the environment, member of the Sierra Club, a great outdoorsman. And he was kind of handpicked to help guide the effort to create a new agency that would oversee the growth and management of national parks. He committed to a 1-year term to do it, and he used his charisma and his kind of sparkling personality to build a groundswell of public support. So when the Park Service was officially established in 1916, he was really the logical choice to be the first director, and he took a hands-on approach. Traveled extensively by automobile from park to park, and also generously contributed to the parks from his own personal fortune. After his death in 1930, many of the parks installed memorial plaques throughout the park system and or named landmarks after him. If you've ever been up to Great Falls, there's a Mather Gorge there. So, interestingly enough, Death Valley was a national monument at the time that he was director of the Park Service, but it did not become a national park in his lifetime. He was actually very careful to kind of keep that separate. He didn't want to be accused of favoritism for any of his prior business connections with Death Valley, but he did encourage public support for it to eventually become one. Well, next up here is George Alexander Grant. He is probably the most famous photographer that you've never heard of. After being stationed out west during World War I, he really wanted to return and did so by signing on as a seasonal ranger at Yellowstone. He was given the opportunity to stay on at the park, but he decided he really wanted to leave and pursue photography with the hopes that he was going to become a Park Service photographer. One small problem with that, however, was that no such job actually existed for that at that point. So, but he had planted the idea, and he was kind of ahead of his time. And 7 years later, lo and behold, his dream comes true. And he was hired as the first staff photographer for the Park Service. And he was specifically charged with building up sort of an image library, if you will, for use in public affairs, for reports to Congress, and for different programs. So he logged literally, sort of like Mather, thousands of miles going across the country in an automobile. He tracked it on this map that just kind of looks like a big thing of squiggles at this point. But to go and document events, Civilian Conservation Corps projects, park art and architecture, personnel, you name it. And by the time he retired in 1954, he'd created more than 30,000 different images. So even though his work is really well known, his name is not. Most of his work is just simply credited as NPS photo. But he is probably, his most enduring images are the 5 that were included in a set of postage stamps that came out in 1934 to commemorate the park. So more than 152 million of his images were in circulation, and no matter how you kind of slice it, that's pretty good market saturation there. Next up, Ding Darling. Here's a guy who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial cartoonist who really did kind of move the needle on wetlands conservation. He was appointed in 1934 to help head the Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Biological Survey, and that was kind of a precursor to our Fish and Wildlife Service. He'd been transferred in, and right about the same time that the legislation was passing to guide the migratory bird hunting stamp, and so he was kind of put in charge in that, and it passed, and the act called for the design and sale of duck stamps to hunters, and the proceeds from those sales would then go to help fund the preservation of crucial habitats. And he was actually asked to make some suggestions as to what that first stamp would look like, and he didn't think too much about it. The quote story is that he kind of grabbed a coat hanger from his office that had the little cardboard insert in it, and he just kind of quickly made a sketch on it and handed it off. And little did he know that actually a few days later made its way to the engravers and became the first duck stamp. So he was a little shocked by that, but it was extremely popular. It was a picture of 2 mallards, you can see it there, and it sold 600,000 of them in the first year. And that duck stamp program obviously is still alive and well today, raising approximately $25 million annually for migratory bird habitat, and has raised, over $750 million and conserved more than 6 million acres of land since it started. So quite the legacy for Ding Darling. Rachel Carson, another precursor for the Fish and Wildlife Service. She was a biologist with the Bureau of Fisheries. Her research and writing obviously popularized the environmental movement for mainstream audiences and really kind of introduced that vocabulary for us. She actually published her first 2 books while working for DOI, but then departed in 1952 to concentrate full-time on her writing. Her 3rd book came out in 1955, and then in 1962 she came out with Silent Spring, which of course most of you know her for. Really critically acclaimed as being among the most influential science books of all time, and kind of sounding the alarm about the dangers of pesticide in the environment. Her career was cut short from cancer. She died just 2 years after the book came out, and there's several things named in her honor, including a wildlife refuge up in Maine. And finally, Costa Dillon. Any Park Service people out there? Is that name a household name for anybody? So I don't actually know how many people you can say this about, but Dillon, he recently retired about 2 years ago after a much decorated 35-year career with Park Service that just rivals his success as a filmmaker and screenwriter. He has been bestowed with DOI's Meritorious Service Award and has received numerous accolades through the Park Service. He's been superintendent of various prominent parks, but he's also the man behind Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. That breakout hit of 1978 for a budget of just under $100,000. This kind of musical comedy horror mashup really parodied B movies and rapidly earned him a cult following. He made 3 sequels, all while still working for the Park Service, and that brand still continues to keep him busy after more than 3 decades. Well, Costa Dillon and his Killer Tomatoes really are the perfect segue to this next sequence, where I want to really delve a bit more into the commercial filming on public lands. This was kind of more of the truly historic section of the exhibit. So we start off with public law, and we're not going to go into legislative history. Of course, filming has been taking place on federal lands, or what would become federal lands, for a long time. But it's really not until the year 2000 that our 106th Congress set out to standardize the fee structure across both the Department of Agriculture and specifically the Forest Service, and then DOI, calling for the secretaries of both agencies to require a permit and establish reasonable fees for those commercial filming activities. So basically, you have permits being required for commercial photography. That includes motion picture filming, videotaping, sound recording, still photography. That's not news broadcasts, things that are happening, here and now. It's planned activities. If it's going to be involving advertising, if it's going to be involving models or props or sets, and if it's going to be any kind of disruption to normal visitor usage in that space. There's usually then an application fee that covers the administrative costs of doing that permit, and the turnaround varies pretty widely, but if you're out there wanting to do a commercial film permit on public lands, plan on anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, and then be pleasantly surprised if it's less than that. Also, in accordance with public law, the criteria for determining a location fee has a lot of different criteria with it, and it can include the number of days that the activity is going to be going on. Is it a one-day deal? Is it going to be, go over the course of several days? How many people you're going to have as part of that film crew? What kind of equipment are you bringing in? Is it just going to be, a couple of cameras and that's it? Are you bringing in huge props? And any other kind of additional labor costs. And then the agency can actually do cost recovery charges if they have actual costs that are being incurred by them to monitor that activity. So kind of by the numbers here. What does this all really mean? And how does that translate day to day for our land managing bureaus, these 4 here, that really are affected with the commercial film permitting? The numbers and statistics that I'm referencing here are from 2007. So to kind of take this as a relative order of magnitude, it's actually really difficult to parse out the numbers from kind of some of our later reports. So, but it's pretty close. So Bureau of Land Management, an average of about 350 commercial film permits annually. As you might suspect, the BLM in California receives the most. BLM Utah, BLM Nevada are pretty close behind. And it's pretty consistent. I mean, there's talking to folks out there. Some of those sites have at least one permitted film project happening every week, so it's pretty significant. Bureau of Reclamation, because the requested sites here are usually dams or power plants, and more often than not it's Hoover Dam specifically. Reclamation really takes security and operational issues quite seriously and under really special consideration, especially after 9/11. Further, to ensure that the project's content doesn't misrepresent reclamation, they're the only bureau that I know of that actually have to have the script content reviewed prior to approving a film permit. And it's approved by a regional public affairs officer. And the biggest reasons for reclamation rejecting film permits tend to be more on the safety and disruption side of things. There have been instances where film crews have wanted to shut down the road over the dam for like a week, or they wanted to drop race cars down into the spillway and drive them around, and those were pretty kind of clear cut. Sort of more on the script end of things, it tends to be plots involving terrorists blowing up the dam. But then, if you recall, Superman gets, that script was approved, and it's because he goes back in time and rotates the Earth back so that the dam doesn't blow up from Lex Luthor, and so that's all good. And the Transformers they approved because that story was just so far-fetched that nobody would kind of think that it was really true, and it's this all-spark thing that these warring alien robots are trying to protect, and it's buried inside the dam. So, Park Service, as you might imagine, lots and lots of over 400 different sites around the country, so they kind of get the lion's share of the permit requests. About 2,000 film and 1,000 photography permits issued annually across all 400 plus units of the park system, but of that, far and away are kind of congregated within a few. So there are some park units that never get film requests in any given year. But the most, probably not as a surprise, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Golden Gate, Santa Monica Mountains, Independence National Historic Park, Jefferson Expansion Memorial, and our very own capital region here. And then obviously with things like the Civil War 150th, you might get kind of a spike in different sites because of different historic events. And then you've got Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're probably on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of number of requests, only about 100 or so a year. And all that goes to show is that there are a lot of feature films. Student films, music videos, commercials, ads, television shows, you name it, that are being done on public lands. And I don't expect you to be able to read like the microscopic font there, but it'd rather just be awed by the sheer number of all of them, and that's not even all of them. The first, however, I'll draw your attention to is that very first one, the Immortal Alamo. It's, as far as I know, the first done on federal land, 1910, and as to what would become San Antonio Mission National Historic Park. Another early one up there in that first line or two is Daughter of Dawn from 1920, and that was noteworthy, and we feature it up in the exhibition because it featured an all Kiowa and Comanche cast of over 300 Native Americans. Silent film filmed in Oklahoma on what is now National Wildlife Refuge land in the Wichita Mountains. Well, what's so fascinating is that DOI lands have played roles as other countries. You can see that here's our Fish and Wildlife Service refuge complex area in the Guadalupe-Nipomo Dunes, played Egypt in the 1923 film 10 Commandments. You have Alabama Hills playing India as part of Gunga Din in the 30s, and Alabama Hills again playing more recently in 2008, masquerading as Afghanistan as part of Iron Man. And we have also had lands playing other planets even. We've got Glen Canyon was the planet of the apes. Various Star Trek movies taking place on public lands. That top photo there of Spock is at the terraces in Yellowstone National Park. It was his home planet of Vulcan. Down below, it's Trona Pinnacles, part of the BLM California lands. It's the planet Shakari. It's where Kirk sees God. Is out in California, apparently. And then Death Valley National Park was filmed a couple of times in conjunction with the Star Wars trilogy, and the most recent one being the Return of the Jedi. So there's different planets. And then even our headquarters building has gotten in on the action. as a stand-in. We don't even get to play ourselves. We have to be a stand-in for other federal buildings. So No Way Out with Kevin Costner in 1987. This building doubled as the Pentagon. He raced through the hallways, and I think Carolyn could probably tell you they used the library, the DOI libraries, for some of the scenes as well. And then in 2009, in the movie State of Play, I was walking up the grand staircase there with Russell Crowe, Helen Mirren, and Ben Affleck, and that was, in this case, supposed to be doubling as the halls of the Capitol. We've been in a couple other films as well. Salt with Angelina Jolie. We were just the exterior of the building. And then the movie Sentinel, our parking garage, I think the B ramp was in the movie. And one of our security officers actually was a last-minute stand-in for that. So the diversity really is pretty staggering. Sci-fi movies, television series, episodes of different films like Mythbusters. They did a car drop out at Cuttyback Dry Lake on BLM land. The more recent version of Planet of the Apes, Land of the Lost. Drive Shaft, that television show, Touched by an Angel. Just as diverse as you can imagine, we've been in it. Commercials, ads, catalog shoots, of pretty much anything imaginable. Anheuser-Busch, the Clydesdales, the Energizer Bunny, sunscreen, outdoor gear, clothing, swimwear, LL Bean catalogs, you name it. And obviously here, cars and motorcycles, lots of them. I read someplace about 90% of all cars produced in the U.S. models have been filmed at some point at White Sands National Monument because of that nice white backdrop. But this slide here actually shows ones from BLM lands in California, and there's Audi and Land Rover and a lot of foreign cars as well, like Isuzu, Mitsubishi, and obviously the landscape is very stunning and great for them to be able to show off the speeds and the different capabilities of these cars. Some more images. It was the upper left there is a MasterCard commercial. The explosion was part of the filming for a Jimmy Choo shoes commercial. And then this most recent one was just for the Super Bowl commercial, and just this year's Super Bowl. It's for Jack in the Box. It was the buttery Jack burgers, and Jack in the Box is riding his motorcycle across BLM lands. So, and this is really all well and good and certainly fun to look at and kind of pick out these things. But it's also a really good time to bring up the fact that there's a pretty fine balance being struck here as that interplay between stewardship and entertainment. So historically, I'm going to go through this on a couple of different levels. Historically, there's been a sense of having to uphold the honor and integrity of these lands and how they've been portrayed. And the case in point, in 1958, the location manager for MGM Studios writes to the Park Service requesting to use Mount Rushmore as, quote, the impressive backdrop for the climactic sequence of our motion picture tentatively entitled North by Northwest. Well, the film's director is none other than Alfred Hitchcock, and he had already, without any incident whatsoever, been involved in filming at another park site. He included Statue of Liberty as part of his 1942 film Saboteur. Well, this time they were kind of concerned that Hitchcock might overstep his bounds because this was going to be a spy thriller, and it might have scenes that might physically harm the monument, and it might desecrate it in the minds of the American people. So with that in mind, the Park Service negotiated this agreement that said that Mount Rushmore could certainly be filmed and used, but that any scale models of it, any backdrops that they painted, anything used back in the studio, and any filming on site, it couldn't be used for any violent scenes, none. So the film crew came on location. They were there for a couple of days and appeared to adhere to all the guidelines. They took some establishing shots of the memorial. They filmed Cary Grant in the restaurant there and some scenes in the parking lot, and those did make it into the movie. Everybody's going to go out and get it on Netflix tonight, right? So you can kind of imagine how NPS officials felt when they screened the final footage, and lo and behold, there's violence on the memorial, but not the real one. They recreated it back in the studio, but that was off limits as well, and it shows Cary Grant and Ava Marie Saint scrambling across the faces of Mount Rushmore and getting chased by villains, and the scandal, I mean the horror of it. So they were extremely upset. There was this whole flurry of finger pointing and heated correspondence that gets sent back and forth. But North by Northwest gets released anyway in 1959, and immediately DOI comes out with a letter saying that they have to remove any mention of crediting NPS or DOI anywhere in the film because this was just horrible. So kind of ironically, the extra hype surrounding all this gained both more attention for the film and for the monument proper, and it is, conceivably kind of considered to be one of the best films of all time in sort of movie lore. But it did cause NPS to kind of re-examine their look at how they were doing permitting. A more recent example, very current this year, San Andreas, the movie that just came out this May with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, right? Remember I mentioned earlier that Reclamation's permitting process includes script review? Well, this was actually a case where they denied that. Producers requested to film at Hoover Dam, but they said no because this is an instance where, if you haven't seen the movie, Hoover Dam is destroyed by an earthquake and floods everything. Reclamation felt that was not a good portrayal, that they've actually built this dam to withstand very high-level earthquakes and didn't want to be associated with that. So they denied the filming there, and the film production company decided to do it with computer graphics and some stock footage instead, and sort of end of story. So that's on the intellectual integrity side of things. Some more on the logistical planning. And for this section here, I want to just give a shout out to some folks in the field that have helped with this exhibit. In particular, Elaine Hansen with BLM, for a lot of the images for some of the BLM lands out west. For more than 19 years, she's been a film program coordinator for BLM. She's the primary contact for location scouts, technical scouts, producers, directors, anybody wanting to do filming on lands overseen by BLM's Ridgecrest field office in California. So she is really kind of the frontline person shepherding requests through the permitting process, coordinating these logistics, and ultimately being on site doing the monitoring. And if it sounds exhausting, it is. And each project kind of brings its own nuances and complexities, but I've tried to grab a few photos here that kind of show some of the more common issues when filming on federal land. So the productions crew convoy, shows up, and it's just to give you a sense of how many trucks and vehicles are involved here. And they are required to park in designated areas. They have to use, rigging and dolly track, and they confirm all of that in advance. They will place cones where big set pieces need to go, like the airplane that's in there. That's not always sitting there on BLM land. They bring that in just for the filming, and they very carefully orchestrate where that can go, that it's not crushing something or blocking some kind of habitat. That middle picture there is filming for Land of the Lost at Trona Pinnacles, but that's just kind of show that before any filming ever takes place, she does a pre-film briefing with all of these crews and the caterers. So it's everything from, don't leave your trash out because it attracts pests and scavengers and ravens, and don't park here because that's trampling vegetation and the like. Any pyrotechnics. Now every project doesn't necessarily involve things blowing up, but if it does, she has to very carefully review that. They take a materials list and look at all the chemicals that are being used. She's got to coordinate what fire response is on hand, if it's just a team that's on standby, or if she has to have a tanker truck rating right there. They are verifying those special effects managers' credentials. They're looking at their license, if they're allowed to transport and handle those kinds of materials. And this is probably more site-specific for her, but in her case, she's near a couple of military bases, so if there's going to be any kind of aerial photography or explosions, she needs to give those folks a heads up in advance. And then, of course, she's also doing, monitoring of weather and coming up with contingency plans as well. So that's just kind of a good kind of sequence, an example of the kinds of things they're dealing with, sort of all behind the scenes for film projects. And it's not just logistics, but it's also, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, the environmental stewardship aspect of this too. Many of the areas used for filming on federal lands are areas of critical environmental concern. That's an official designation, and it can be because of vegetation or habitat or geological formations out at Trona Pinnacles. The thing that makes it an area of critical environmental concern are those tall, fragile tufa pinnacles that are out there. So any of those things can be cause for concern in what they're managing for the land. So don't crush the brush is kind of the operative phrase out in the Alabama hills. They are very much looking at minimizing soil compaction and trampling of vegetation. And in any setting, whether it's National Mall or someplace out west, they're going to be mindful of key wildlife habitat. So for Elaine's case, it means coordinating and consulting with the field biologists or the natural resources managers about, in her case, desert tortoises and plovers at Sandy Point National Wildlife Refuge in the Virgin Islands, which is frequently scouted for everything from sunscreen commercials to swimwear shoots, and even an episode of The Bachelor, I think, was filmed there. And in their case, it's sea turtles. Sandy Point is home to the largest nesting population in the United States of endangered leatherback sea turtles. So the beach is strictly off limits to all but researchers and staff and volunteers during that active nesting season. So even though it's pristine and a much sought after location, wildlife comes first. And in the final photo there, there's dismantling the set of it was a fairly short-lived television series called The Event. And so they've removed all the trash and the props, and in this case the production crew was asked to kind of sweep and literally leave no trace. And depending on the site, they may even be asked to replant vegetation as well. And finally, in terms of stewardship as well, I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't mention economic impact, and it kind of happens at 3 stages. One, prior to the filming, I mentioned all that permitting process and scouting fees. In the grand scheme of things, commercial film permits are just a drop in the bucket. It's a very small slice of the pie. I mean, think like hundreds of thousands of dollars to the low millions when compared to permits and leases collected by DOI overall. And yet it's critical for these sites and the field offices to collect these, because it does help their maintenance budgets and allows them to do projects that they otherwise would not be able to do. Just to kind of give you a sense, and I was able to find a bit more recent numbers from fiscal year 2013 for BLM, about 437 permits in that fiscal year, revenue collected just on the permit side of things, $312,000. So not a huge sum of money, but a big deal to those field offices that are interacting with them. Economic impact also comes into play while filming. There's a very tangible impact of providing jobs and giving a boost to the local economy. And of course, there's those intangibles like all the goodwill of interacting with the community. Kind of give you a sense over time that 1923 filming of 10 Commandments in the desert employed 1,500 construction workers. They filmed for 6 weeks, used 3,500 actors. So I mean, you can start to see the magnitude of this. Gunga Din, that was 1939. It took them 104 days to film, and the cast and crew all lived in this temporary tent city in the Alabama hills for the duration. It's now BLM land. In 1994, the final scene for Shawshank Redemption, that with Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman was at that Sandy Point National Wildlife Refuge with the sea turtles. And they took 4 days to set up and film, and that was just one scene. It's that final scene in the movie right on the beach. And with meals, transportation, lodging, equipment for the cast and the crew, those 4 days contributed an estimated $1.2 million to the local economy. So that's a big deal. 2007, in the case of Transformers being filmed at Hoover Dam, the production company shelled out about $110,000 alone to rent the parking lot for all their trucks and gear, and then to pay all the different employees that had to be on hand to monitor. And the shoot lasted about a week. So there's some real tangible carry-throughs that go through. So the final phase of economic stimulus is in the out years. And there's lots of examples of this contributing to cultural tourism and cultural economy in the long term. Misty of Chincoteague is that famous children's book from '47. It brought worldwide attention to the pony swim and auction at Assateague and Chincoteague, and there's sequels and a movie and a museum. Fan mail for Yogi Bear and Yellowstone. Alabama Hills BLM land actually has a movie road self-driving auto tour where you can visit sites. So again, kind of contributing to cultural tourism. And that bottom picture there is, well, a lot of people go to Death Valley to kind of seek out the Return of the Jedi locations, because it's a lot easier to get to than Tunisia, where they filmed a lot of the rest of the early films. But there also is a tribute for U2 out there, because other little known fact, the Joshua Tree album was not at Joshua Tree National Park. It was just outside of Death Valley, so there's a little monument plaque there that says, "Have you found what you're looking for?" And people go to find that too. And of course, if you're visiting and going out there, you need places to stay, you need places to refuel or rent your car, and you need, have other things to do. So that does kind of trickle through the economy. Well, you've seen how frequently federal lands appear on air and on screen and in print. And there's other times where the department has teamed up with established pop culture icons to further promote its missions and initiatives. So the final section here that we're going to go through deals with some of those examples really quickly. And this first guy didn't make it into the exhibit upstairs. It's Cuthbert. It's the National Park Pop. But I just liked it, so it's here. So in 1942, Cuthbert, it was this old English sheepdog, and he was proposed to be an NPS mascot. And it was going to be publicized via this kids radio program. And for whatever reason, it didn't ever really take off. So we don't have Cuthbert as the mascot today. He was very adventurous apparently, but it was also at a time when a lot of dogs weren't allowed in parks, especially out west. And so I think it just didn't fly. But shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? So he did not become the face of the Park Service. On the other hand, you've got Yogi, who very much resonates with us still to this day. He started out on Huckleberry Hound, got his own show. A couple years later, he's your smarter than the average bear. He's really good at stealing picnic baskets, and it's very thinly veiled. Jellystone is Yellowstone National Park, and so light bulb goes off. Superintendent of the park writes to Yogi, specifically Yogi, in 1960, hoping to kind of cement that connection with Hanna-Barbera, and specifically in terms of wildlife messaging. And Hanna-Barbera acquiesces, and there's actually a whole series of park interpreter ranger slides and programs that use the Yogi image at that time to help with don't feed the bears and don't lean out of your car and all that kind of good stuff. The Roadrunner, that's obviously Warner Brothers. Roadrunner dates back to 1948, but as recently as 1980, BLM was using Roadrunner and Chuck Jones's artwork for educational pieces and teacher's guides. This specific one up in the exhibit is a piece from our collection dealing with off-road vehicles and respecting wildlife. Mark Trail. The comic actually dates back to 1946. We have a couple pieces in our collection. One is from the 80s. That was an activity booklet for Fish and Wildlife Service about the environment. And in 1990, he did, it's been a couple of different artists over time, but did a strip related to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Johnny Horizon, anybody remember Johnny Horizon? Anyone? He was literally the face for BLM in the late 60s, and was so successful that the Department of the Interior appropriated him for their own, as for the department-wide, as part of an anti-litter campaign. And it was pretty extraordinary. I mean, they enlisted Sonny and Cher, they enlisted Burl Ives, and they did songs, and I'm not going to hum them for you because they're like a total earworm, but they're just, they got legions of volunteers. They were distributing litter bags and had thousands of people picking up trash across America, and it was supposed to all be a cleanup for the bicentennial. And unfortunately, Johnny Horizon kind of faded into the distance after the bicentennial. But most currently here down the bottom right corner there is the Find Your Park launch for the Park Service earlier this year. Again, we're nothing new. We're going back to kind of celebrities. They have 5 celebrity ambassadors for it, and the 2 first ladies, Michelle Obama and Laura Bush, are both honorary co-chairs for that event. So again, using kind of celebrity and pop culture icon status to help get our messages across. Well, very quickly to kind of wrap up here, exhibition development always has its twists and turns, so I think it's always kind of an interesting exercise to go back after an exhibit is up and see what you'd do differently if you had different time or money or resources, being no object, because there's obviously a ton of examples to choose from. And there's no way that this exhibit could have been completely exhaustive or completely definitive. So that being said, in this case, it would be really great to have expanded the show to include some video content. There are some great examples. Donald Duck is a park ranger in Old Sequoia, protecting the sequoia trees. Meet the Deedles. It's obviously didn't take place on federal lands, but that portrayed Park Service employees. There was a Simpsons episode with Carl's Dad's Caverns. Idiocracy, I remember I mentioned he was the Secretary of Interior with his, and because he's got his long sleeve t-shirt that says so with this giant medallion. DOI's been on the Daily Show. I mentioned to you the Piston Peak National Park with the Plains Fire and Rescue, and just earlier this year there was a House of Cards episode where there is a Park Service groundskeeper on that. And so thanks to all of you, because a lot of this, even since the show has opened, other people have come forward with other examples that they found, and so you know who you are. Thank you. And that would be a way to kind of expand or do this exhibition further. It's a little bit of a pricey proposition. A lot of rights clearances associated with any of these kinds of clips or still images can run in the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Multiply that by how much you want to do to have a very image-rich show, and you get to see that the numbers start to add up. And then, of course, there's always new examples coming out. Filming does not cease on public lands. In fact, earlier this year, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Shailene Woodley were out filming in just behind the White House for this movie Snowden that's going to be coming soon in theaters near you this Christmas. And then this is the, Mattel has been saying for the last 8 months that there's going to be a small little Matchbox car die-cast toy of our Secretary of the Interior coming out. And I'll be first in line to get that for our collection. So to end our time here this afternoon, I'm going to close out on a very quick and fun note, and the same way we do with the exhibition upstairs, and that is with a very quick pop quiz. There are just 3 questions here. If you've seen the exhibit and know the answers, that's not fair to play, but we're going to see if you film buffs know your federal lands here. So first one, and I'll read the little clue to you. So the opening credits for this 1980s psychological thriller featured haunting title music and sweeping aerial shots of a lone yellow Volkswagen Beetle traveling along what road in what national park? It is The Shining. It's Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and it is in, anybody know the park? It's the Going to the Sun Road in Glacier. I've got your prize for you here. All right. Second one. John Irving's book was adapted into a 1999 movie by the same name. Key scenes with actors Charlize Theron and Tobey Maguire were filmed at this national park locale. Name the movie and the park.
But I have no idea.
You got it.
It's maybe cry every time.
Movie's Cider House Rules,
Cider House Rules.
And it is an Acadia National Park. So, Pet Cemetery, a scene from Pet Cemetery was also filmed at Acadia, and Stephen King is actually a Mainer, and so that kind of made sense. Our last one for the day here. In interviews about her starring role in a 2014 drama, actress Reese Witherspoon told the New York Times and all of her Twitter followers that this place, quote, took my breath away as both her favorite spot in filming on location and on the Pacific Crest Trail. Where was she and what was the film?
It's The Wild. It's called Wild.
The Wild, yeah. The movie was The Wild, and it's obviously it's Crater Lake National Park. And an interesting side note here was they were scheduled to film, and sequestration happened. The shutdown happened the day that the film crews were supposed to be rolling on in. And so obviously that didn't happen. But a sort of a happy end to the story was that they stayed in touch with the production company, worked really hard to kind of get them in just as soon as they could after the shutdown lifted. And so it did happen after all. So I've got that for you here. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions, but thank you for listening.